Good morning, everybody. Delighted to be here this morning to open today's conference. In my role as Sustainable Futures Commissioner for Wales and Chair of the Climate Change Commission. Interesting listening to the First Minister there in terms of the context for today. I think words that we need to pick up. We need to look at this point about aspiration and reality. We need to look at acceleration and build momentum. We need to look at potential and the potential into reality. And I hope what I'll try and do in the session that I've got this morning to open the conference is to give some context to those words. But just to begin with, to give a little bit of background, obviously, Sustainable Futures Commissioner is a new appointment for Wales. It's an appointment which follows on from the Sustainable Development Commission, which was ended by the UK government. And energy is at the heart of the role that I have to play as Sustainable Futures Commissioner, supported by Cymru Cymru, Sustain Wales. It's the crunch issue. It is the issue of our time in terms of sustainability. Both in terms of economic, social and environmental factors. It's at the heart of what the Climate Change Commission for Wales is about too. And it was just about 12 months ago that we were here in the Centre for Alternative Technology launching the Climate Change Strategy for Wales. The Climate Change Commission is the body which is cross-sector, cross-party, responsibility for advising government, for building consensus for action across the sectors. Interestingly, all the political parties represented around the Commission, mobilising action across the sectors and reporting on progress. So one of the first jobs that the Climate Change Commission has to do is to produce a report, 12 months on how we think the climate change strategy is being delivered in Wales. How have we done 12 months on from when that photo was taken, when the strategy was launched here in Kent, to today, how have things gone? And one of the things I want you to encourage as a first action from the conference is to make a note of that, and make a note of how you're going to contribute into the review that the Climate Change Commission is undertaking. And I'll leave you with the website that you can do that with at the end of the presentation. Now, the climate change strategy obviously sits within this sustainable development commitment that we have in Wales. And you're all aware of One Wales, One Planet, the current scheme that we have a duty to promote. It's a scheme that's currently being evaluated. It's legally required at the beginning of every new administration that the effectiveness of this scheme has to be evaluated. And that scheme evaluation is being undertaken today by PricewaterhouseCoopers, reporting in January back into plenary in the National Assembly. So we're at a time when we're actually just taking a bit of stock. How things have gone in the past 4 years, how that scheme is operating, and how the Climate Change Commission is going to view the delivery of the climate change strategy. We're also, though, at a point where looking forward, we're going to have a new Sustainable Development Bill announced in the programme of government. So over this next 2 years, we're going to be shaping a bill which will strengthen and deepen the duty on sustainable development, extend it across the public sector, and set up a fully established, legally established commission body in Wales, which will build on my current role as Sustainable Futures Commissioner and establish a fully fledged, properly established commission body. So we have an opportunity to shape, again, part of the process of devolution. How this is making Wales distinctive in terms of how we govern ourselves for the long term, and how we translate some of the rhetoric of sustainable development into reality. Now, what's going to be included in that bill is a bit of a blank sheet of paper at this point in time. So again, in terms of actions from today, how do you engage with shaping this bill so that it makes the rhetoric into reality? That, I think, is the key theme of today's conference and of this thinking. Now, I don't often quote Richard Branson, but I saw that the other day, and I thought that was quite an interesting sort of definition of why energy is so important in terms of this concept of sustainable development here in Wales, which is such a broad frame, and we think of the bill in that broad frame. Now, how do we make it focused, and how do we make it real? Well, I think energy has to be one of those key themes. And of course it was in the last administration. You heard the First Minister there talking about the level of investment that the Low Carbon Revolution document, March 2010, set out that energy policy statement, setting out objectives in terms of the scale of renewable energy production, the scale of self-sufficiency, quite ambitious targets set out within that programme in respect of that policy statement. Now, you can ally that with another document that was produced in the last administration. How does Wales support green jobs? The Green Jobs Strategy for Wales. And I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is how those sorts of strategy documents produced in the last administration connected to delivery. I can certainly say, as far as that green job strategy, it ticked the box. The last administration said they were going to produce a strategy, they produced it. Whether it actually made any difference in terms of mainstream delivery of economic development policy, it didn't. It was developed very much out on the edge of mainstream thinking about economic development policy, right out on the edge of the department responsible for that policy, and never really fully implemented in terms of the economic development strategy here in Wales. Yet, we have this image of our brand. Jonathan Porritt conducted a review of how the greenest government ever, the UK government's claim, was going after 12 months. It's a great document, if you haven't read it, the report of the Friends of the Earth. Great analysis. But in it, he makes this quote, that we have the strongest claim for leadership on sustainable development within the UK. And indeed, if you go around to talk to colleagues in Europe, they're all aware of the Welsh commitment to sustainable development. My concern is the reality gap between that rhetoric and the reality. And in terms of reviewing where we are, obviously, as the First Minister highlighted, we've probably got to start by looking at the issue of onshore wind and the learning from it. It's been referred to, I think, quite fairly, actually, as an unmitigated disaster in terms of policy. The strength of the community campaign that's grown, and I've been involved in, if you like, both sides, if there are two sides of this discussion, in that I've been involved in a number of meetings with the community groups. And it's interesting the words they used about the experience. Duped, conned, subterfuge, betrayed. Those were the words that were used by communities genuinely feeling ignored and taken for granted and not being told the whole truth in terms of the development of that strategy over a long period. So what we have today is not simply an immediate response, but something that's grown over a long period. And if you look at the responsibilities for that, it's where the issues come to fruition from that. Then it has to start right at the beginning of this process, which I think for many was a top-down process, imposed from outside, imposed from a government from outside, and then reinforced by sort of big business names. Arab, who did a bit of the work on it. Developers who were big business names. So the communities felt done unto, as opposed to engaged in the process. But if we look, on the other hand, at the investors, this was about Wales saying, we're open for business. Come on, we're open for business. We've got this commitment to sustainable development. Come on, come and do business with us in Wales. We've gone through this process. We know where we want you to do business. As a result, many of you in this room have invested millions of pounds in this process. And many of you I know are questioning, actually, is Wales a place where we want to do business? Are the costs too great? Is the process too complicated? Have we got a relationship between government, business and the community in Wales that enables us to do business? And I think we have a breakdown in certainly this particular case, which is a breakdown of trust, which is a breakdown of belief between government, between business, between the communities, a trust gap. And I think the concept of a trust gap has to be at the centre of our discussions today in terms of how we fill that gap. It's built up over time, and we need to learn the lessons. A lack of community involvement, a lack of clarity in leadership responsibility at different levels in government, from national to local, and also the role of the business sector. And I'll pick up on some of these points as we move forward. And of course, what we've seen very clearly is the response to that, which is a serious response that we need to take seriously. It's a response that we shouldn't sort of just say, oh, well, it's only a few people who don't want it in their backyard. It's a response that we really need to take seriously, engage with, and learn from. I think we can learn from a lot of places. I think we can learn from Scotland. It may be a theme that comes up a few times today. If we look in Scotland, I was being very struck with Community Energy Scotland, operating over the last 7 or 8 years, very effectively as the community energy voice. I think there are better examples of community engagement and community benefit in Scotland than we probably have in Wales. And I've been part of a process which has been working with communities to see if we can establish the equivalent Community Energy Wales as an independent voice to address the blockages, develop financial models, and ensure that the community energy sector is fully represented in plans. Now, we've made some good progress, some brilliant, if quite frustrated people around Wales working at community level, trying to deliver community energy generation at the local level. It is a game changer. It can be hugely significant in terms of community regeneration activity and hugely important in terms of social justice dimensions, which the First Minister highlighted. But frustrations have built up. We need to have a clarity and a focus and a voice around the table that represents those voices who are trying to make that happen at a community level and who can engage strategically with the big investors that we have wanting to develop big programs. Because, of course, this is going to be a mix of the small scale and the large scale. It's not one or the other. It's not just small scale. We're going to need large scale as well. And I just want to take a moment, slightly out to one side, but it is actually quite important today to recognise we need to look wider than Wales. And one of the things I'm particularly proud of in terms of the Welsh devolution and the programme of government is a small scheme called the Wales for Africa scheme, tiny amount of money, which is connecting Wales with communities in Wales. Over 70 communities currently have a relationship with a community in sub-Saharan Africa. And as part of that scheme, just undertaking now, is this clean energy programme, which is providing clean energy support into those communities in Africa that have relationships with communities here in Wales. And I think quite innovative. The Welsh Government has made, through its climate change division, a grant available based on a levy, essentially, from the costs of emissions from unavoidable ministerial and staff travel, including the cost of the Minister going to Durban for the climate change talks. Very important he goes, but there'll be a levy on that flight which will come back into this scheme. It's not offsetting, it's a good climate change investment programme. And I would encourage the industry to get behind that programme as a distinctive programme in respect of the Welsh contribution to the bigger global challenge. So, slightly by the way, but I think very important. Let's come back to government. The response of the First Minister, the response of the Labour Party, has been to ensure that the First Minister now has direct leadership responsibility for energy. I think if you look at the last administration, energy was sort of all over the place. Small teams scattered about, variety of different sets of responsibilities, a lack of clarity within it. We now have a clarity of leadership in terms of First Minister, supported by John Griffiths as Environment Minister, and also Mrs Hart in terms of economic development. And I've highlighted there the energy and the environment sector panel. That's highlighted a certain set of strategic enablers, which that panel, as the sector panel responsible to the Minister for advice, has set out. It's early days, but I would just say probably there's still a bit of work to be done to connect the different segments of within government, even within this new structure. I think we're getting there. From where I sit in terms of engagement with the climate change team, links across to the energy and environment sector panel, there's a bit of connectivity that we need to make sure happens within government. But I think we've made a huge step forward from where we were in terms of leadership responsibility and indeed business engagement through the sector panel. And it's interesting to highlight some of the points that they've stressed, you'd be familiar with, what's going to be critical for the energy decade going forward. Streamlining decision making being one. There's a cheer goes up around the room at this point from certain members of the audience because decision making has taken a long time. Local authority. Also, we'll hear from Roger this afternoon. People have said 2 agencies, Environment Agency, CTW, very difficult, different strategies, different approaches. The big opportunity, shaping the single environment body, part of that streamlining process. So that, again, getting the structures right in Wales to be better includes the new single environmental body. So you can see some of those sort of key points that we, that have been highlighted there. I won't go through them now. I want to come down though to the role of local authorities. This was part of the process of getting local authorities to take more responsibility. And I think it's a critical one. I would want to call for a clarity of leadership in each local authority at cabinet level and at an official level. Who is responsible for energy strategy? We have a First Minister responsible strategically nationally. Who in your local authority is responsible for generation and efficiency across the local authority, not in terms of simply the local authority state, but strategically across that local authority? Who is responsible? And that is a campaign call I think that we need to follow out from today. Equally, in the restructuring of local authorities, and something I think we've lost potentially from the last administration and the transfer to the new administration is terribly poorly implemented, but the spatial plan. That spatial planning is going to be important as far as renewable energy development in Wales is concerned. Currently, the spatial plan is sort of dead. It may be reinvented, possibly reinvented in the form of regional collaborations between the local authorities. But equally, if we're going to put regional functions together for local authorities, we must make sure those regional functions include a strategic responsibility for leadership on energy, generation and efficiency across those regional coordination areas. And let's not forget it's local authority elections this year. We have a lot of variations in our experience of working with local authorities. And I don't just mean planning, I also mean economic development. I know some local authorities have really taken on the economic development opportunities of renewable investment, where others don't see that as being central to their strategy. Now, we are obviously tied up with the big politics, and it's interesting that the First Minister didn't actually mention this, and I'm pleased he didn't mention it, because I think there's a danger that we use it as an excuse. We have got to get our own environment right for doing business in Wales. Of course, there is an issue about devolved responsibilities, and there's a complexity in the current devolution boundary which is unfair and I think needs to be addressed. But we must not use it as an excuse. We must not use it as the reference point for every statement about how we're tackling renewable energy in Wales. We've got to put the positive frame, which the First Minister did, in terms of how we're making Wales the place to do business. And part of that place to do business is this investment we have in research and development. The Climate Change Commission held a conference in July where we brought together all the HE research and development institutions from around Wales, all the institutions that had money and were investing in programmes. It's a stunning amount of money. that is going into HE in Wales on climate change related, low carbon related developments. It is a massive investment, partly from European funds, partly from other research funds, and partly from Welsh Government. I've just highlighted 3 there. There are others. The Commission was really staggered, I suppose, by the level of investment, the potential of that investment, and the high quality work that was being undertaken. But whether we're realising the potential of that in terms of business opportunity and commercialising the innovation is perhaps a question we might want to test in terms of today's event. Let me come on to this bit about learning from others. I think the sector needs to look at how it's competing and how it's collaborating. That, I think, is part of today's agenda. It is about competing, absolutely, but it's about collaborating and connecting. And I think we're doing ourselves a disservice in Wales by not having something that is really focused on Wales. Scottish Renewables is a model that I know most people here will be aware of. But it's clearly the voice of the industry in Scotland. It's clearly a place where you can go and see what's happening in that industry in Scotland very, very clearly. I don't think we've quite got the same in Wales. We've got to look at how we meet that trust gap. I chaired a meeting, some of you were at it the other day, with Professor Nick Pidgeon, Professor of Environmental Psychology in Cardiff University, one of the leaders in the field in the whole of the UK and Europe. We have him in Cardiff, although he does most of his work in Scotland, by what I can see. And one of the things that came to me from that meeting was actually not a lot of sharing. What's working in community engagement? What processes work best? How best has this operated across different developers? Developers quite often who subcontract that process onto other people who do it on their behalf. Not a lot of sharing between those subcontractors, between those PR agencies or communications agencies and the companies in terms of what's working and what's not working. We've got to look at how we meet that trust gap. So, learning from Scotland, absolutely. Learning from the UK. Tony Juniper, many of you will be aware, Action for Renewables, just launched by Renewables UK, a great campaigning website with some great campaigners behind that website. My old colleague Jonathan Porritt, a whole range of champions, trying to take that sort of positive campaigning message out from the renewables sector and its partners. Have a look at Renewables Vermont. Very interesting, as an example from outside of Wales. A combination between the sector, business, colleges and universities, communities and individuals. Again, providing that focal point. Another one I'd highlight, closer to home, Southwest England. Regen Southwest. Produce every year an annual report on how things are going in the Southwest, broken down by authority, benchmarking authorities for their progress on introducing renewable energy into their areas, highlighting the blockages, highlighting the issues as an annual report. How I'd love to see such a document produced for Wales annually as a benchmark of progress. And interestingly, it may be different now because the Regional Development Agency is gone, but I did a session with Deloitte in Cardiff about now 18 months ago, and I asked them, they come at the Southwest and Wales, and I said, okay, if you had a client, where would you advise? Where would you prioritise, Wales or Southwest of England? They said Southwest of England, absolutely. Greater clarity of engagement, greater area of focus, greater level of support for that introduction to a renewable industry. That may have changed with the demise of the Regional Development Agency, but we've got to learn from those sorts of experiences. We've got some great experiences in-house, and I do want to highlight Energy Island because I think it's one of the lessons from it is about creating a brand, a common vision, a common purpose, connecting government, business, and the community, and creating a brand and a vision that brings people along with it. I think there's learning from that. There is, of course, though, the critical bit about what do people really want to see happen through this process. And of course, climate change is one of those issues, but more immediately, given the state of the economy, is the issue about, does this really bring jobs? Is there really economic benefit out of this process? And that, obviously, is where I won't pause. I won't say any more, because Brian is going to take us through that in more detail in the next presentation. And I'm just going to end by just highlighting some of the points, saying, look, this is about building the Wales brand. The Wales brand has got sustainability written through it. But what we haven't got is the sustainability in reality, in terms of experience on the ground, strong enough at this point. There's a range of things I think we can do. I've mentioned these points through the process, and I hope they will perhaps stimulate some of the practical outcomes from today in terms of what we need to do differently in Wales in order to accelerate and gain more momentum in terms of the delivery of renewable energy in Wales. And in terms of my role as Sustainable Futures Commissioner and Chair of the Climate Change Commission, I hope both of those functions can play the role of a trusted intermediary, making the connections between government, community and business. I look forward to working with you to take it forward from today.